Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the 9th verse of Śrī Aruṇācala Padigam. The verse is Paramanim Padam Patrara Patrum Paravari Variril Paraman Paramarakanaven Paniara Paniai Paritiru Marekidu Barum Paramanip Pirandiv Ulahine Taliel Patriam Petradu Podum Paramana Maharshi Enevi Iniun Padatinil Drukora Parel. I'll first read the paraphrased meaning of this, and then I'll go through the whole verse. Why I read the paraphrased meaning is because the literal translation is, there's a lot implied but is not quite stated there. So in the first sentence, the implication of the first sentence is, Supreme, I am supreme among those who are destitute of the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. Taking the burden, the responsibility for saving me, that's what's implied, as for you or as yours, may you ordain my activity to cease. For you who bear, implies everything, for you who bear everything, what is a burden? Supreme, separating from you and grasping this world on my head, what I have got is enough. Aruṇācala, who are the supreme, do not see or allow me henceforth to be away from your feet or from your state. That's the general meaning of the verse. So if we go through it sentence by sentence, the first sentence is Paramanim Padam Patrara Patrum Paravari Variru Paraman. The literal meaning is addressing Aruṇācala as supreme, supreme among those who are destitute of the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. What is implied there is, I am the supreme. So he addresses Aruṇācala as supreme, and he refers to himself as supreme among those who are destitute of the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. It's very beautifully worded in Tamil. The Tamil wording alludes to a verse of Tirukkural, a very well-known verse of Tirukkural, which Bhagavan often used to refer to. I think it's verse 350. I think it's the final verse in the chapter on renunciation. The Tirukkural verse is Patruha Patratram Patrine Apatre Patruha Patru Vidaku. What that means is the word patru is both a verb and a noun. As a noun, it means attachment or clinging. As a verb, it means cling. So the meaning of the verse is cling to attachment to he who is free of attachment. Cling to that attachment in order to be free of attachment. In other words, we need to cling to clinging to he who is free of clinging. And by clinging to that, we'll be free of clinging. So he who is free of clinging is referring to God. So if we want to be free of all other attachments, we should attach ourselves to God. So this is a very much loved verse in Tamil. It's a very well known and much loved verse in Tamil. So indirectly, Bhagavan is alluding to this verse of Tirukkural here when he says, I am the supreme among those who are destitute of the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. That is, our aim should be to give up all other attachments and hold only onto the feet of God, who is he who is free of all attachment. But Bhagavan declares himself to be the supreme among those who are destitute of that supreme wisdom to cling to without attachment to the feet of Aruṇācala. It's a very, very beautifully expressed. And I'm sure this is, any true devotee will feel like this, but we are totally destitute of that wisdom to cling without attachment to his feet. That is our aim. Our aim should be to be attached to nothing other than to he who is free of attachment, namely God. And that is the only way to free ourselves from all other attachments. But we are destitute of that supreme wisdom to do so, to cling without attachment to the feet of he who is free of attachment. Then in the next sentence is baram unaku ena en pani ara paniai. Pani has a double meaning. Pani means it can mean service. In this case, it means activity. It also means ordain. So Bhagavan is using it when he says en pani, he means my activity, my rising to do anything is implied. Ara paniai, paniai there means may you ordain, but my activity ceases. And how does the activity cease? Baram unaku ena, the burden is yours. So what it implies is taking the burden, that is the burden for saving me is what is implied, or my entire burden, take my entire burden, including the burden for responsibility for saving me, as yours. In Tamil, it said as for you, but in English we'd say as yours. So taking the entire burden as yours, may you ordain my activity to cease. When he says, may you ordain my activity to cease, the activity, all activity begins with our rising as ego. So when he prays to Aruṇācala to ordain his activity to cease, that implies ordain that my rising as ego to do anything to cease. So that's a very beautiful and very profound prayer Bhagavan is making there. Then the next sentence is Baritidum unaku edubarum. Baritidum means who bear. It implies who bear in the sense who carry or support. So Aruṇācala is as the Supreme Lord, he is that which bears, which carries everything, which bears the entire burden of the universe. So when he's bearing the entire burden of the universe, for him, what is a burden? So the meaning of this sentence is, for you who bear, what is a burden? It implies for you who bear everything, what is a burden? So taking on my small burden, what is that for you? It's nothing for you. I'm not able to bear this burden, but for you it's no burden at all because you bear the entire burden of the universe without any difficulty whatsoever. So what can be a burden for you? Again, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful prayer. Then the next sentence, Paramanipirandiv Ulahine Talil Patriam Petradu Podum. Again, he addresses Aruṇācala as Parama, as supreme. Supreme, separating from you and grasping this world on my head, what I have got is enough. That is when we rise as ego, we seemingly separate ourselves from Aruṇācala, and thus we take the burden of this world on our head. We think things depend on us. We think we have duties and responsibilities. We have responsibilities, firstly, to take care of ourselves, because we identify this body as I, we take on the burden of maintaining this body, and we also feel responsibility for others. So we we take the entire burden of our small world on our head. And we sometimes try and take the burden of the larger world. We look out at the world, we see so many wrongs in this world, so many injustices, and we think that we have to rise to rectify the wrongs in this world. But what Bhagavan is saying here, all this, that what he implies is all this, the appearance of the world and all the wrongs in the world and all our responsibilities towards the world, these all appear only when we rise as ego, thereby seemingly separating ourselves from him. So what he prays is, Supreme, separating from you and grasping this world on my head, what I have got thereby is enough. So Bhagavan is saying, I've had enough of this. I'm tired of rising as ego and taking all this burden on my head. Take the entire burden as your burden. It's not, I can't bear this anymore. I've had enough. By rising as ego, it's just embracing trouble. It's just bringing trouble upon ourselves and upon others. So let us not rise as ego. Let us hand over the entire responsibility to Aruṇācala. Let us subside back into him without separating ourselves from him, and thereby taking on the burden of the world on our head. Again, this is such a beautiful prayer, a prayer of complete surrender. And then in the final line, he sings, Paramana Aruṇācala, Aruṇācala who are the Supreme. Ene iniyun padattinindru Odukku Ura Parel. That literally means Aruṇācala who are the Supreme. Do not see me henceforth to be away from your feet. When he says, do not see me to be away from your feet, it implies, do not allow me to be away from your feet. In other words, do not allow me to separate from you. In a couple of verses earlier, in verse 7, what he said in that verse is, if all the elements, space, air, fire, water, and earth, and what are composed of the elements, which expand as many living beings, are not other than you, the space of light, meaning the infinite space of pure awareness, who else am I? O blemishless, if you shine without another since you shine without another in the heart at that space, that means the space of light, the space of pure awareness, who am I who come out as if another? And then he ends the prayer by saying, may you come outside. In other words, may you manifest yourself, placing your fully blossomed lotus feet on your head, on his head. Sorry, that implies on the head of this ego who rises as if another. So it's the same implied meaning here when he says, do not see me, or do not allow me henceforth to be away from your feet. In other words, do not allow me to continue rising as ego and taking all this burden, the burden of the world on my head. You take on the entire burden by crushing this ego, not allowing it to rise, and thereby destroying this one who is supreme among those who lack the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. It's just such a beautiful prayer. So the meaning of the verse, I'll just read it once more. Supreme, I am the supreme among those who are destitute of the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet, taking the burden, taking all my burden as yours, may you ordain my activity to cease. In other words, may you ordain my rising as ego to engage in activity to cease. For you who bear everything, what is a burden? Supreme, separating from you and grasping this world on my head, what I have got thereby is enough. Aruṇācala, who are the Supreme, do not see me, or do not allow me henceforth to be away from your feet. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, that grasping the world on our head is not just, it means more than just taking the responsibility. We are constantly burdening ourselves with, by attending to the world, by being aware of other things, we are burdening ourselves. But if we had the wisdom to cling without attachment to his feet, we would subside back into him and remain as him, and thereby not have any burden at all. So even thinking of anything, even attending to anything other than ourselves, that is grasping the world on our head. That is unnecessarily burdening ourselves. So if you want to be free of all burdens, all we need to do is to cling without attachment to his feet. His feet are that which is ever shining in our heart as our own being. So turning within and holding on to him in our heart, we thereby subside back into him and surrender and hand over our entire burden to him. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya. So does anyone have any questions about this verse itself?
I think that the questions are about various other things rather than directly about the verse. Should we start with the emailed questions? Yeah.
Yes.
So the question is, I'm not sure how to meditate and was looking for some guidance on Ramana Maharshi's meditation practice. Is it possible to get some guidance on this? It would be great to see it would be great to see how Michael explores a meditation into the self and some tips on doing this as a beginner.
Okay. Meditation simply means fixing our mind on something. So we can meditate on anything. We can meditate on a name of God, on a form of God. We can meditate on any object. We can meditate on the breath. We can meditate on centers in the body, so-called chakras. There are so many different objects that people have for meditating on. People even just meditate on, just try to be attentive to whatever is happening around them or whatever it is. So meditation simply means fixing the mind on something. In other words, attending to it. One type of meditation is called mindfulness meditation. But any meditation implies being mindful. So mindfulness just means attentiveness, and meditation basically means attending. So there are many different types of meditation people do, depending on what type of object they take as the target for their meditation, to fix their mind on. The meditation taught by Bhagavan is fundamentally different to all other types of meditation, because all other types of meditation, we are trying to meditate on some object, some thing other than ourselves. Whereas in Bhagavan's meditation as taught by Bhagavan, we are meditating only on ourselves. That is, we're not meditating on any object, we're meditating on the subject, the one who knows all objects. So this is and this meditation taught by Bhagavan, though he sometimes referred to it as meditation, for example, he sometimes described it as Swarupa Dhyana, which means meditating on our own nature. That means fixing our mind on what we actually are. He generally referred to it as vichara. Vichara means investigation, because we are fixing our attention on ourselves in order to know what we actually are. So this is a very simple form of meditation, but though it's very simple, it's also very subtle. If we are told to attend to an object, for example, if we're asked to meditate on a light, or on an object such as a name of God or a form of God, because that objects are all relatively gross. We it, it's easy to understand what is meant by fixing our attention on it. So if we, for example, if we are devoted to Lord Krishna or Lord Rama or Jesus or Buddha or Bhagavan or any form of God, if we fix our mind on that form or on the name of that form, that's one form. That's a form of meditation. But those are relatively gross things. So, for example, if we want to meditate on the name Ramana, we know what the name Ramana is. Very obvious. So we can try to keep our mind fixed on the name Ramana. But when we are asked to fix our attention on ourselves, we ourselves are something far more subtle than any object. So some people are able to grasp immediately what is meant by fixing our attention on ourselves. But for many people, because we are not an object, they find it difficult to understand what is meant by fixing our attention on ourselves. This is why the teachings of Advaita begin with analysis of what we actually are. This process of analysis is called neti. That it is negating or eliminating the things that we take ourselves to be, but which is not what we actually are. So we analyze, for example, this body. This body is something that appears in waking, but it disappears in sleep and in dream. In dream, we are aware of ourselves as some other body. Since we are not always aware of this body, since we're aware of ourselves, for example, in dream, without being aware of this body cannot be what we actually are. In both waking and dream, it is the same mind that experiences both waking and the same mind that appears in that we take to be ourselves in both waking and dream. So is this mind what we actually are? No, it cannot be, because in sleep we exist without this mind. We exist and we are aware of our existence. So we must be something other than this body and mind that we take ourselves to be. That's one type of analysis. Another analysis is called Drisya Viveka. That is distinguishing literally means distinguishing the seer from the seen, the subject from the object, the knower from the things known. So this body, all the thoughts and feelings and emotions and so on that constitute the mind, these are all objects known by us. We are not an object, we are the subject, we are that which knows. So we need to distinguish ourselves as the knower, or as a witness, as it's sometimes called, from everything that is known by us. So all these different, in classical Advaita they call them prakriyas, these different ways of analyzing in order to understand. But what we actually are is just awareness. We're not any object of awareness. We are that which is aware of all objects. So once we've understood that we are nothing other than awareness, all we need to do is to fix ourselves, our attention on ourselves as awareness. That is, we're not, when Bhagavan defines Atma-vichara as always keeping the mind fixed on oneself, on Atman. Atman means oneself, what we actually are. So that means what we actually are is just awareness. Just sometimes it's referred to as satchit, being awareness. That is, it's not awareness of anything. It's just the awareness which is our being, the awareness I am. So this is what we have to attend to. We have to attend to ourselves just as awareness. That is all we actually are. So though this is a very simple meditation, it's we need to understand it clearly in order to do it correctly. So we need to understand, but what we actually are is not any object, not any phenomenon, not anything that appears and disappears. Because all things that appear and disappear, they appear and disappear in our view. So they're something other than ourselves. So all objects appear in waking and dream and disappear in sleep. So none of these objects can be what we actually are. So we are the basic awareness in which and to which all these things appear and disappear. So we need to try to keep our attention just on ourself as that which is aware of all other things. So this essentially is what it means. It is a meditation in the same sense that, I mean, other practices of meditation, we're meditating on an object. We're trying to keep our mind, our attention fixed on a certain object. In this, we're not trying to keep our mind fixed on any object, but on the awareness to whom all objects appear. So it is simply a matter of meditating on ourselves, and with the understanding that what we are is nothing but that which is aware of all other things. So we can call it meditation on awareness, we can call it meditation on, well, be more precise, say meditation on ourself as awareness, or meditation on ourself as just being. So it's not it's not an objective meditation. It is meditating on that to which all objects appear. Bhagavan, as a clue to help us in this practice, Bhagavan sometimes expressed it in terms of investigating to whom everything appears. Whatever may appear, it couldn't appear if we were not there, because everything that appears to us. So our aim is not to attend to anything that appears, but only to ourselves, the one to whom it appears.
The next question.
You can ask it as it is. It doesn't matter.
Yes, but I will give a little proviso. I don't think I've ever come across a question which isn't respectful to when it's written to Michael.
Yes. Well, I think the same person wrote a few months ago wrote some wrong information to the Ramana Maharshi Foundation about Sadhu Om, saying Sadhu Om had seen Bhagavan only twice, which is not factual information. Sadhu Om came to Bhagavan in 1946. For the first 6 months after that, he would come whenever he was able to. So generally, perhaps every 2 or 3 weeks, he would come for a weekend. And from the end of 1946, he came and he settled in Tiruvannamalai and was with Bhagavan for 4 years. But this person, I think it's the same person, it's a person with the same name, wrote saying that this is wrong information and that Sadhu Om only ever saw Bhagavan twice. So this person seems to be not very, well, anyway. So anyway, you can just read what they've written and I'll answer it. It's not a problem.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to point out that, one of the aspects of spiritual practice, I mean, and the most essential component is to have a nonviolent mind and
Yes.
nonviolent speech. And we do a kind of injustice to ourselves as much as to the person we're speaking to.
Exactly.
When we address somebody in a sort of disrespectful way, no matter how much we may disagree with them, whether it's in spirituality or in politics, in anything, it doesn't matter. So, Michael, I will ask the question, but I cannot ask it the way it's written because I really cannot bring myself to. I mean, it's not that so anything, but I just
Yeah.
cannot. I just.
Shall I read the question?
No, I will read it out, Michael,
Okay.
because I don't think because I'm just going to
Yeah.
it slightly. I mean,
Okay.
so the person who's asking this question feels that there's been some, and this is a quotation, that there's been some damage done to the teachings of Bhagwan by recommending Awareness, Watching Awareness by Michael Langford. And he says that, and yet he feels despite this damage, sort of this method of practice has been sort of fostered, or encouraged.
Yeah. Yes, what he actually says, he addresses me saying, you have done some damage to the teachings of Bhagavan by recommending Awareness, Watching Awareness by Michael Langford. And you made so many people to follow this method of practice. What is your answer? Well, my answer is, firstly, I never recommended. When he puts awareness, watching awareness, it seems he's referring to a book by Michael Langford called Awareness, Watching Awareness, which is not a book I've ever recommended to anyone. When people have asked me whether awareness, watching awareness is a appropriate description of Bhagavan's practice of self-investigation, I have said yes. It is one way of describing it. It's maybe not the best way of describing it, but yes, because awareness, watching awareness, obviously watching is used metaphorically. Awareness cannot literally watch awareness. Awareness, watching awareness means awareness being aware of awareness. In other words, awareness being aware of itself. So it is self-attentive. It's a one way of describing self-attentiveness. We cannot say it's a wrong description because Bhagavan in Nana, the first question asked by Shiva Prakasham Pillai to Bhagavan was Swami Nana, who am I? And Bhagavan's answer was Arivenan, awareness alone is I. Later, for his own clarification, Shiva Prakasham Pillai added some more. That is the most of the second paragraph of Nana, which is the answer to the first, which is in the question and answer versions, it's the answer to the first question. It begins by saying, this body is not I, etc. And after going through a series of things that are not I, it says, what remains after removing all of these, that awareness alone is I. When Bhagavan wrote it, when Manikam Pillai, the nephew of Shiva Prakasham Pillai, first brought the manuscript of Nana to Bhagavan, that is, it was first published as an appendix to a book, to a biography that Shiva Prakasham Pillai wrote on Bhagavan in verse form called Ramana Charita Haval. That was first published in 1923. And since in that biography he refers to some of the answers that Bhagavan had given him, in the appendix he gave this, at that time it was a selection of 25 questions and answers that he had asked Bhagavan. I think it was 25 in the first edition. So when Manikam Pillai brought the manuscript to Bhagavan before the book was published, seeing the answer to the first question was more than Bhagavan had actually said. Bhagavan said, who said all this? I didn't say this. Then Bhagavan himself, before Manikam Pillai replied, Bhagavan then said, yes, Shiva Prakasham Pillai, because he had studied philosophy, he would have added all this for his own clarification. So this, but Bhagavan let it remain there because, I mean, we have to infer that Bhagavan understood that it would be useful to most people. That is, Bhagavan's approach rather than saying what we are not, Bhagavan goes direct to the point. What we actually are, we are just awareness. But in order to understand that answer, what Shiva Prakash Pillai had added, basically the neti-neti method, the neti-neti analysis, that would be useful. So Bhagavan allowed it to remain. I mean, Bhagavan retained it there. And when he later rewrote the questions and answers in the form of an essay, he underlined in red his own answers. Well, he underlined the original question, Nana, at the beginning of the paragraph, and his own answers, which were Arivenan and Arivin Swarupam Satchidanandam. He underlined that. Arivin Swarupam Satchidanandam means the nature of, because the second question Shiva Prakash Pillai asked is, what is the nature of that awareness? Bhagavan said the nature of that awareness is Satchidananda. So Bhagavan underlined that in red, and it has always been printed in bold type. So the very first answer Bhagavan gave to Shiva Prakash Pillai is awareness is I. And this is obviously this is the primary teaching of all of Vedanta. Among the four Mahavakyas, one of them is Prajnanam Brahman. Prajnana is Brahman. And all the other ones point out that Brahman is I. So it means the awareness that we actually are, that is Brahman. And Brahman is defined as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. Satyam means reality or being. Jnanam means awareness. Anantam means infinite. So what we actually are is infinite being awareness. So to say that it is to imply as this person who wrote this question, to imply that it is doing damage to Bhagavan's teachings by saying that we should be aware of awareness is clearly it has no, I mean, it's not at all justified. I have never recommended Michael Langford's book because though I think it's describing the practice of self-investigation as awareness, watching awareness, that is not a wrong description. But there are many other things in his books which I think he goes wrong in many places. So I have never recommended anything by Michael Langford. But when people ask me whether awareness, watching awareness, is a correct description of the practice, I say yes, it's one way of describing the practice, but we need to understand what is meant by it. Because when we talk of awareness, that is, according to Bhagavan's teachings, nothing exists independent of our perception of it. That is, Bhagavan's basic teaching about the nature of the world is what is called Drishti Shrishti Vada. Drishti literally means seeing or perception, and Shrishti means creation. So the implication of that is what this name Drishti Shrishti Vada, that means the perception creation contention is the literal meaning of it. What it means is that nothing exists independent of our perception of it. So just like in a dream, we perceive a dream world, and so many things are happening in that dream world, so many experiences we have in that dream world, but that dream world and all the things that happen in it have no existence whatsoever independent of our perception of it. In other words, the world we experience in a dream doesn't exist independent of our awareness of that world. It's just it's a mental fabrication. It has no existence independent of our awareness of it. And Bhagavan says the same is the case with this waking world. So this whole world is nothing other than our awareness of it. So when we talk of awareness, we need to be clear what we mean by awareness. We're not talking about awareness of other things. People talk about we need to raise awareness about climate change. We need to raise awareness about such and such an injustice that's happening, there, that's not the awareness, that's the awareness of things other than ourselves. The awareness, when Bhagavan says awareness alone is I, he's not referring to awareness of other things. He's referring to that which is aware of all things. And that which is aware of itself. And, well, again, we need to be a little bit careful here, because Bhagavan distinguished two types of, or two forms of the same awareness, what he called Suttarivu and Suttatrarivu. Suttarivu, I generally translate as transitive awareness. Transitive means as in transitive verb. A transitive verb is a verb that takes a direct object. An intransitive verb is a verb that doesn't take a direct object. So if, for example, a verb like watch, watch, when you say watch something, you have to say watch something. If you just say watch, you say the answer that will come back is watch what. So watch is a transitive verb because it has an object. But if you say stand, stand doesn't have an object. Well, in some uses we can say stand the chair up again if it's fallen over. But in the usual usage, if you say I stand, there's no object. It's an intransitive verb. So verbs are classified as transitive or intransitive, or some verbs can be transitive in one context and intransitive in another context. But this is a basic description. So transitive means having a direct object. So what Bhagavan referred to as Suttarivu, or transitive awareness, is an object-knowing awareness. In other words, ego, that which knows the world, which knows phenomena, that is transitive awareness. Whereas pure awareness is intransitive. It's awareness without any object. It's just pure awareness. Awareness just of itself. I mean, it's not aware of anything other than itself. That is what Bhagavan called Suttatrarivu, which means intransitive awareness. So the awareness to which all things appear is ego. But the reality of ego is the pure awareness. So if Bhagavan often, for example, he said, whatever may appear, investigate to whom it appears. To whom it appears means it appears to that which is aware of them, that is ego. But if we turn our attention back to ego, as Bhagavan has made clear, ego will subside, and when ego subsides, what remains is pure awareness. So pure awareness is the reality underlying the appearance of ego. Just like the rope is the reality underlying the false appearance of a snake. If we see what seems to be a snake, if Bhagavan is with us, he knows very well it's a rope. So he will tell us, look very carefully at it. If we look at it carefully, we see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we look at ego, if we watch ego, if we attend to ego keenly enough, we will see its underlying reality, which is pure awareness. So we will see, oh, it's not the ego that it seemed to be, it is just pure awareness. So awareness is always only one. But when it seems to be an object-knowing awareness and a transitive awareness, it's called ego. But its underlying reality is the pure awareness that we actually are. So whether we consider self-investigation to be investigating ego or investigating what we actually are, it makes no difference, because as Bhagavan always points out, there's only one I, there's only one self. So whether you call it ego or call it swarupa, it's the same. It's essentially the same thing. That is, ego is nothing but swarupa, what we actually are, appearing to be something else. So what we actually are is pure intransitive awareness, but we seem to be transitive awareness. But in either case, we are just awareness. So our aim is to turn our attention away from all the things of which we are aware, back towards the one who is aware of it, the one to whom the awareness to which all the objects of awareness appear. So Michael Langford's description of it as awareness watching awareness is not a wrong description. It may not be the best description, because the trouble is when we talk about awareness, people may not understand exactly what is meant. Because awareness can be associated with awareness of other things. So a better way of describing it, what is aware, being aware of what is aware. If we understand awareness, it's used in this context in the sense of what is aware. When Bhagavan says awareness alone is I, he's not talking about awareness of other things. He's talking about what is aware. So what is aware is what we actually are. So if we understand awareness watching awareness to mean what is aware, being aware of what is aware, then that is an, an appropriate description of the practice of Atma-vichara. As Bhagavan has defined Atma-vichara in Nana as Sarakalamum manate Atma-vil Vetiruptikutan. Atma-vichara Mendrupaya. That means the name Atma-vichara is only for always keeping the mind on oneself. So keeping our mind, keeping our attention fixed on ourself is Atma-vichara. Our self there means our self as awareness. So we are what is aware, and we are attending to ourself. So it is aware, it is what is aware, is being aware of what is aware. Or to put it in other words, awareness watching awareness. This is not a wrong description. And some people find it a helpful description. That doesn't mean I'm recommending Michael Langford's book. So, he also says, I made many people follow this method of practice. I just try my best. When people ask about what Bhagavan has taught, I try to help people to understand what is the practice, very simple practice that Bhagavan has taught us. What does Bhagavan mean when he says, keeping our mind fixed on ourselves? He means keeping our mind fixed on what is aware. So this is the method of practice taught by Bhagavan. If we understand it correctly, of course, any words are open to misinterpretation, misunderstanding. Many people read Bhagavan's writings and they misunderstand. They think they have to question, who am I? Question to whom does this thought appear? Bhagavan never said question. He said investigate. So investigate means investigating to whom means in turning our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourself, the awareness to whom it appears. So this is not a wrong description of Bhagavan's, and it's not doing damage to his teachings. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Thank you, Michael. The next question is, in self-inquiry, we make use of the chit aspect of the ego. Could you explain this in as detailed a manner as possible?
This is exactly what I've been talking about. The chit aspect, chit means awareness. So in Maharshi's Gospel, in one place where Bhagavan is explaining about the practice of self-investigation, he explains that ego is what is called chit jada granti. Chit jada granti, chit means awareness, jada means what is not aware, and granti means a knot. So it's a knot formed by the entanglement of what is aware with what is not aware. Why ego is called Chit Jagranti is because it is the false awareness, I am this body. I am is awareness. The body is jada, it's non-aware. So ego is a conflation of what is aware with what is not aware. So it is called Chit Jagranti, the not formed by the entanglement of Chit and Jada. So after explaining that briefly in Maharshi's Gospel, Bhagavan says, in your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti, you take the essential chit aspect of ego. What Bhagavan refers to there as ahamvriti, that's a Sanskrit term, which means I thought, basically. That's another term that refers to ego. So ahamvriti and ego are one and the same thing. It is a thought because it is not that what is not a thought is only satchit. Anything other than satchit is a thought. So ego, because it's a mixture of satchit and the jada body, it is a thought because all jada things are just thoughts. So ego is the first thought, the root of all other thoughts. It is, though Bhagavan has said it's a thought, he made it clear it's unlike all other thoughts because it's the only thought that is endowed with awareness. Other thoughts are not aware of anything. They're just objects of awareness. The subject, the knower of all thoughts, is ego, which is therefore the first thought. Without ego, there cannot be any other thoughts. So if we want to get rid of all thoughts, we have to get rid of ego. That is why the aim of Bhagavan's teaching is eradication of ego. So when he says, in your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti, when he says source of the ahamvriti means that from which ego rises. That is, the source of ahamvriti is satchit. So it's that when he says, in your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti, you're taking the essential chit aspect of ego. That is, we're not attending to the body or mind or any of the other adjuncts, which are all jada. We are attending only to the essential awareness aspect of ego, namely, I am. So we're just attending to this being awareness, this awareness of our being, which always shines as I am. So what he means when he said you take the essential chit aspect of ego is we're attending only to ourself as awareness, is basically what it means. So it's the same, I mean, it's what I tried to explain in answer to the first question, and what I also went further to explain in answer to the second question. It is the chit aspect is the awareness or the consciousness aspect of ego. In other words, what ego actually is only that chit aspect. The jada aspect of ego is unreal. The reality of ego is the chit aspect. And he says, because you take only you're investigating only the chit aspect, it leads to that pure awareness, which is what we actually are. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
The next one. So the question is, in my attempts to cling to self-attentiveness, there is a fierce battle going on. There appears to be a foreign, dark matter that has a willingness of its own. The practice is almost never quiet. This resistance takes the form of a sensory movement within moving very quickly that only stops for very short periods. The question is about the meaning of surrender in view of this resistance. I also know that love has to be more present.
Yes, this is the same difficulty that we all face. That is, as Bhagavan makes clear in verse 25 of Valludhanapadu, the very nature of ego is clinging. He says that having described, in the last line he describes ego as Uruvatra Pe Ahande. That means the formless demon ego. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. Since it's got no form of its own, it's got no separate existence of its own. So it seems to have a separate existence only when it attaches itself to a form. So what he says from the beginning of the verse is, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into being. Urupatri nikum, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongum, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. So from this we have to understand the very nature of ego is grasping forms, grasping. Since ego is formless, whatever forms it grasps are things other than itself. So the nature of ego is to grasp things other than itself. Since ego is formless, how does it grasp things? It hasn't got any hands for grasping. It grasps things in its awareness. In other words, grasping form means attending to things other than itself. The first form ego grasps is the form it grasps as soon as it comes into existence. It's simultaneously with its coming into existence, it projects and grasps the form of a body as I. A body means not just the physical form of the body, but all the five sheaths. And it cannot stand, it cannot endure for a moment without grasping form. So when he says in the first two sentences, grasping form, it comes into being, grasping form, it stands, there he's referring primarily to grasping the form of a body as I. Having grasped the form of a body as I, we don't stop there. We continue, our mind goes outwards and we're constantly grasping other things, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, so on and so forth. So it's the very nature of ego to dwell on things other than itself. That's what Bhagavan means by grasping form. Therefore, but he also says in that verse, Tedinal otum pidicum, that what that implies is, if instead of grasping other things, if ego tries to grasp itself, Tedinal means if seeking, that means if ego seeks to know its own reality, if it seeks to know what it actually is, if it seeks to know who am I, it will take flight. That means it'll run away, it'll disappear. Why? Because we seem to be ego only so long as we're attending to things other than ourselves. As soon as we turn our attention back towards ourselves, ego begins to subside and dissolve back into its source. Since we have strong attachments, as Bhagavan said in this verse I talked about today, I am the supreme among those who who are bereft of the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. When he said cling without attachment, that means without attachment to anything else. But we need to have attachment to his feet. His feet are that which is shining in our heart as I. So holding on to self-attention is clinging without attachment to his feet. But the problem is we are not without attachment. We've got very strong attachment to other things. So it's our strong attachment to things other than ourselves that make us reluctant to cling with attachment, to be attached only to his feet. So how to cling without attachment to his feet? We need to have supreme love for him. Only if we have supreme love will we cling to him as he actually is, always shining in our heart as I. So that is why love is the essential ingredient in this practice. That's why Bhagavan often said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. How to cultivate this love? The only means to cultivate this love is by abhyasa, by patient and persistent practice of self-investigation. As Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of Nana, when he says, what's it matter however many thoughts arise? As and when each thought arises, it's necessary to investigate to whom. If we investigate to whom it has appeared, it will be clear to me. If we investigate who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace and the thought that had risen will subside. What he means by that is when he says it's necessary to investigate to whom, if we investigate to whom, it'll be clear to me. Investigating to whom means turning our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourselves. having turned our attention back towards ourselves, to the me to whom it appears, what do we have to do then? We have to hold on to that self-attentiveness. So holding on to self-attentiveness is what he means when he says, if one investigates who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace. So if we hold on to the if we turn our attention back to ourselves and then hold on to that self-attentiveness, the mind will subside and return to its birthplace, to the source from which it rose. And when the mind subsides, all the thoughts will also subside. And then he says, Ippadi paraka paraka, mana tuku tampirapiditil tangi nikam shakti adikadikindradu. That literally means by practicing and practicing in this way, for the mind, the strength to, the power, the shakti to abide in its, to remain in its birthplace increases. So what he implies by that is the more we practice trying to turn our attention back to ourselves and hold our attention on and hold on to that self-attentiveness. And then again, whenever the attention goes out, again turn it back. The more we practice in this way, the more we will gain the strength to remain subsided in our source. So practice, and that strength to remain subsided in our source is the strength of love. Because it's only by love that we are willing to surrender. That is, by turning our attention back to ourselves, we are letting go of all our other attachments. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 26, so the next verse of Ulladu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, know that investigating what this is giving up everything. What he means by that, why he said that in the last sentence, if we investigate ego, as he explained in the previous verse, ego will subside and disappear. It will take flight, autem pidicum, it'll run away. That's a metaphorical way of saying it'll subside back into its source. There's nowhere else for it to run. So it has to subside back into its source. Since when ego subsides, everything else will also subside. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So we have to be willing to surrender everything, ourselves and all other things, in order to be able to know ourselves as we actually are. Therefore, this path of Atma-vichara is the pinnacle of the path of surrender, the final surrender, the surrender of ego itself can be achieved only by means of Atma-vichara, because the nature, if we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are feeding and nourishing ego. Only by attending to ourselves will we subside in such a way that we will never rise again. So it requires great, great love, which, if we're honest with ourselves, we all have to admit we are lacking. We may have a little bit of love, a little bit of curiosity to know who am I. We're attracted to Bhagavan, we're attracted to his teachings. We try to put it into practice, but our love is still grossly inadequate. We still, if we're honest with ourselves, we still feel ourselves to be the supreme among those who lack the supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to his feet. So that is, Bhagavan wrote this prayer, this verse 9 of Aruṇācala Padigam. He wrote it for us because that is the situation we're in. We're becoming increasingly tired of separating from him and carrying the burden of this world on our head. So we're praying to him, this is enough. I'm not able to follow this path because of my attachment, but give me the love that is required to follow this path and to subside back forever in you. That is the sum and substance of all of Bhagavan's prayers. Bhagavan, of course, had no need to pray for himself. He's praying to show us how we should pray. We should pray only for the love to subside back forever into the heart. The difficulty, we all face the same difficulty in this path. We're all up against our strong attachments for things other than ourselves. And so long as we have strong attachments, we cannot subside back within. That's why in the 11th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan defines Vairagya as not attending to anything other. And he defines jnana as not leaving oneself. And he says, in truth, these two are one and the same. And then he goes on to give the analogy of the pearl diver. Just like pearl divers tie stones to their waist in order to sink and retrieve the pearl that is lying at the bottom of the ocean, so each one of us can, with tying the stone of vairagya, with vairagya, we can, that the vairagya is analogous to the stone. So like with the stone of vairagya, we can sink deep within ourselves and retrieve the Atma-muttu, the self-pearl. But it requires vairagya. And vairagya, of course, vairagya and love are one and the same thing. That is, to the extent to which we have love to know ourselves, we will have vairagya towards other things. Vairagya means freedom from desire, freedom from passion. And as Bhagavan says, not attending to anything other than ourselves, that is vairagya or nirasa. Nirasa means desirelessness, freedom from desire. So the problem is the same for all of us. The solution, clearly pointed out by Bhagavan, is abhyasa, constant, persistent practice. Only by trying more and more to turn our attention back to ourselves and to hold on to that self-attentiveness will we slowly gain the power of love to remain subsided in our source, our birthplace, the place from which we rose.
So the next question is, please could you talk on Bhagwan's relationship with his body in different periods of his life? I've heard Michael say that Bhagwan's first insight into the nature of the body came when he saw his father's dead body. Later in the temple in Tiruvannamalai, when he was maybe in his teenage years, Bhagwan took very little care or even no care of his body. The attitude of little or no care of the body seemed to change later in Bhagwan's life at the ashram. Question. As knowing I am not the body seems a very helpful pointer to turn one's attention back within to investigate who am I, if not the body. I was interested to hear you talk on Bhagwan's experience and also on how a Sikha might best apply this teaching. Thank you.
Well, the truth is, Bhagavan had no relationship with his body. From the moment he turned his attention inwards, when that fear of death arose in his heart in Madurai, he was overwhelmed by a fear of death. So he understood death means death of the body. With the death of this body will I also die. Though he described it in so many words, he made it clear that actually it wasn't a thought process. It just happened spontaneously. But he described it in words this thought process must have been going on in his mind for some time. Obviously, he had practiced all these things in previous birth. When he saw the dead body of his father, when he saw everyone weeping seeing his father's dead body, this was when he was 12 years old, he asked, why are people weeping when father is lying here? And some elder person there said, no, this is not your father. This is this is the body of your father, but your father has, well, no, they said, if this was your father, he would greet you with affection. But he's not, your father has gone. Then he thought about it. What is it? All this time I was taking this body to be my father. And now they say, my father is gone. The body is still lying here, but my father is gone. So he thought about it deeply, and then he came to the conclusion, I now know this I in me, but my father's I has left his body. He understood that. So from that was like a seed that was working in his mind, but I and the body are something different. So he was often thinking about this. And because he was often thinking about this, that day in July 1896, when he was sitting in an upstairs room in his house in Madurai, supposedly doing his study, this thought must have come to him again. So, and it rose as an intense fear. So he spontaneously turned his attention back within to see whether, when this body dies, will I also die? And he turned his attention within so deeply that he merged back into the heart and remained as the heart. What then shone through that body was no longer the ego that was formerly identified as formerly identified itself as I am Venkataraman. What that ego had been completely eradicated, annihilated, dissolved forever back into its source. So what shone through that body from then onwards was Bhagavan, that is the Supreme Lord, Aruṇācala himself, was shining through the form of that body. But there was no identification with that body. Bhagavan has, in many ways, Bhagavan clarified this. One way was in a verse in Ulladu Bandam. I think verse maybe 32 or something. He compares the body to a cart. Yes, it's verse 31 of Ulladu Bandam. He says, just like a person sleeping in a cart, he's referring to a bullock cart. Just like a person sleeping in a cart is not aware whether the cart is moving or standing or whether it's been unyoked from the bullocks. Likewise, for the jnani who is asleep in this fleshy body, he's unaware of the movement of the body in sleep or the body in nishta. So he's completely unaware of the body. Why? Because when we see after mistaking a rope to be a snake, when we see that it's actually just a rope, we no longer see the snake. Likewise, when we know ourselves as we actually are, we'll no longer see the body and world, as Bhagavan makes very clear in the 3rd and 4th paragraphs of Nana. So for Bhagavan, there was no such thing as body or mind or world at all. There was only Satchit. As he says in verse 28 of Upadesh Undiyā, when one knows what the nature of oneself is, then Anadi, Ananta, Akanda, Satchidananda. Satchidananda means being, awareness, happiness. That is what we actually are. And he describes it as Anadi. It's beginningless. It has no beginning. It's eternal. Ananta. Ananta means endless, limitless. It's infinite. There's no limits on it. And it's Akanda. It's unbroken, undivided. It's one infinite whole, indivisible whole. That is what we actually are. And that is all that will remain when we know ourselves as we actually are. When we know the underlying reality, the appearance disappears. That we can no longer, once we've seen the snake is actually just a rope, we can no longer see the rope as a snake. Because we see it only as we've recognized and know for sure that it's just a rope, it's not a snake. So we can never again mistake it to be a snake. Like that, Bhagavan, Bhagavan says, when we know the reality of ourself, the body, mind, world, all will cease to exist because they're all just an appearance. They appear because of our self-ignorance. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, they will disappear. So for Bhagavan, there's no body. But when we're talking about Bhagavan, when we're talking about his coming to Tiruvannamalai and his staying for, we don't know, maybe 6 weeks or so in Patalingam without any food or water or anything, with his thighs being eaten by the ants and lice and vermin and not vermin, but I mean whatever creepy crawlies were there on the floor of that uh, uh, neglected shrine within the thousand pillar mandapam of the Aruṇācala temple. The whatever creatures were there on the floor, they ate the skin on his thighs in such a way, but the pus and blood sealed his body to the ground. So when he was eventually found there and lifted out by some devotees, they were overwhelmed when they lifted his body, because his body was sealed, his thighs were sealed to the ground. He'd been sitting there unmoving, completely oblivious to the body. So when they lifted him, the wounds were that he was separated from the floor, and so the wounds were opened and blood and pus started flowing down his legs. And then they very gently brought him out and took him to the Illipay tree, seated him under the Illipay tree. And then they tried to get him to eat something, but he was so oblivious to the body. What they did, but the Abhishekam milk from the mother shrine in the Aruṇācala temple, every day they would bring that Abhishekam milk, and they would open his mouth and slowly feed it into his mouth. So oblivious was he to the body. As time went on, he slowly, in our view, regained body awareness. But when we say in our view, we're talking about the person that he seemed to be. That is, because we see him as a body, he seems to be a person. So we can say when he was in Patalingam, that person wasn't aware of the body at all. But slowly that person became aware of the body again. But we need to remember this is all only in our view, because in his view, there's never any such thing as body or world or anything. There is only Anadi, Ananta, Akhanda, Satchidananda. That is all that exists. So whatever we say about the life of Bhagavan, as Bhagavan often says, it's all true only in our view. It's in our view that he seems to be a body, in our view that he seems to be a mind, in our view that he seems to have undergone all this severe tapas in Patalingam and elsewhere. It's in our view that he answered questions. It's in our view that he cut vegetables. In our view, he went round the hill. In our view, that he sang Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam and Uludunapadu and Upadeshundiya, Atma-vichara, and all these songs, and wrote Nana. All this is only in our view. So Bhagavan says very clearly in verse 31, I think, of Uludunapadu. Yes, in verse 31, he says, how can we know or comprehend the state of the one who does not know anything other than self? So he knows nothing other than himself. So with our finite minds, we cannot adequately comprehend his state as it is such. If we want to know the state Bhagavan was in, we need to be in that state itself. Even to call it a state, that is, he's not in a state. He is that. He is Brahman itself. We can know Brahman only by being Brahman. As he says in verse 26 of Upadeshundiya, Tanai iritale, tannai aritalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Because what we actually are is awareness. Awareness can never be an object of awareness. We can know the pure awareness that we actually are only by being that pure awareness. So he is nothing but that infinite Satchidananda. So for him, there's no body or world. But in our view, he seems to be he seems to be a person with a body and mind, just like us. And so when we talk about him as a person, we need to distinguish that person that he seemed to be from what he actually is. That doesn't mean we should think the person he seems to be is unimportant. Why did he appear in the form of this, in this human form of Bhagavan Ramana? It was in order to give us these teachings. So the love and clarity and wisdom that shone through that form, and that is, we can still see it when we see his pictures today. When we see his eyes, we can still see that love and gentleness and clarity shining in his eyes. That is Bhagavan. That which is shining through that body, that is Bhagavan. That is our own self. That is what we actually are. He's nothing but our own self, appearing outwardly in the form of Bhagavan Ramana in order to turn our attention back within. In order for us to know ourself as the awareness that we actually are, the pure awareness that we actually are. So we can know him only by being him. And we can be him only by dissolving back into our source, ceasing to identify ourselves as I am this person.
The next question is, prior to total surrender, it seems a genuine repentance is necessary.
Yes, we need to repent for for the original sin. What is the original sin? Bhagavan said the original sin is our rising as ego. So that is the original sin, the root of all other sins. It's the root of all good actions and all bad actions. So we need to repent for this original sin of rising as ego. And the only way to repent for it is to cease rising as ego, to merge back into the source, which we can do only by means of self-attentiveness.
The next question. I remember reading some verses of Bhagwan on how breathing quietens the mind. Did Bhagwan recommend pranayama as a supplement to self-investigation? Do you practice pranayama, Michael?
No, I don't. Bhagavan didn't recommend it. In Upadesha Undiyar, he's talking about all the four margas, the four different types of yoga. That is the karma yoga, the bhakti yoga, the the classical yoga, the yoga of Patanjali, which involves pranayama, and the yoga of jnana, which is Atma-vichara. So he's talking about all of these. But he's pointing out how each of these must eventually lead to Atma-vichara. When he talks about the path of karma, that's nishkarmiya karma, desireless action. He doesn't separate it from the path of bhakti. That is the preliminary practices of the path of bhakti, the puja, japa, and dhyana. These are actions that we need to do without desire, but just for the love of God. So when he talks about nishkarmiya karma, he's talking about puja, japa, and dhyana. But he gives a very broad definition of puja. If we have the attitude that all the 8 forms, that is the 5 elements, the sun, moon, and jiva, in other words, the whole of creation, if we consider the whole world to be a form of God, worshipping with such an attitude is good worship of God. So anything we do with an attitude that we are serving God is good worship. So he gives a very broad, he's not limiting worship just to ritualistic worship. You can worship by sharing your food with a hungry person. You can worship by not damaging the environment or trying to minimize your impact on the environment and so on. So there are so many ways. It's the attitude. It's, as he says, ennuru yavam, any yuru. Any means considering or thinking. So with that attitude that everything is God, what you do with that attitude, that's good worship of God. So he talks about these puja, japa, and dhyana. These are the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti. But then he says, rather than worshipping, in verse 8, I won't give the exact meaning, the implied meaning, he uses the words anya bhava and ananya bhava. Anya means what is other, and anya means what is not other. So he says, rather than worshipping God as something other than oneself, worshipping God as not other than oneself, with the understanding he is I, that is best among all. So long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, so long as we're meditating on God as something other than ourselves, that is a mental activity. But when we understand that God is I, and therefore turn our attention back to ourselves, to meditate on nothing other than ourselves, that is not an activity, a mental activity. That is a cessation of mental activity. So in the next verse, verse 9, he says, by the strength of that meditation, being in Satbhava, being in the state of being which transcends all bhavana, all mental activity, that is supreme, that is parabhakti tattva, that's the nature of supreme devotion. So when instead of worshipping God as something other than ourselves, when we worship God as ourselves, we thereby subside and remain in the state of being. And that is the supreme devotion. So he shows there how the bhakti, how karma is the preliminary stage of bhakti, how that leads to the ananya bhava, the meditation of God is not other than oneself, which is Atma-vichara. So he shows there how these karma and bhakti must eventually merge into the path of Atma-vichara. And then he says, being without, that is subsiding and thereby being in the place from which we rose, that is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. Then he talks about, in 11 and 12, he talks about pranayama. He explains the efficacy of pranayama. That is just like, that is the mind and the breath come from the same source. They're like two branches of a tree, originating from the same root. So if you restrain the breath, you'll also restrain the mind. And if you restrain the mind, you also restrain the breath. So pranayama is a means for restraining the mind. And he compares it to catching a bird in a net. So that's a means to restrain the mind. But merely restraining the mind will, by itself, will lead only to manolaya, that is temporary dissolution of the mind. So in verse 13, he says, dissolution is of two kinds. That means dissolution of mind is of two kinds, laya and nasa. What is subsided in laya will rise again. Whereas if its form dies in nasa, it will not rise again. Thereby he implies our aim is not just a temporary subsidence of mind, we seeking the permanent dissolution of mind, the nasa. And then in verse 14 he says, the mind which, only if the mind which subsides when the breath is controlled, only if that mind is sent on the knowing path, the orvari, the orambari, the path of investigation, the investigating path, will its form die. What he implies by that is, if we merely practice pranayama, if all we can achieve is manolaya. This is what he says clearly in the 8th paragraph of Nana. He says, he concludes that paragraph by saying, therefore, pranayama is only a means, only an aid to restrain the mind, but it cannot bring about manonasa. That's the conclusion of that 8th paragraph. So the most you can achieve by pranayama is a temporary subsidence of mind. So if you want to achieve permanent subsidence of mind, then that mind which had been calmed by means of pranayama needs to be sent on the investigating path. That implies the path of self-investigation. In other words, only by turning our attention back within will the mind subside in such a way that it will not rise again, will its form die. So though he mentions pranayama there, he's not recommending it. He's mentioning it because these are different approaches that people take. But he makes it clear that in the 8th paragraph of Nana, he makes it very clear. But if you restrain the breath, the mind will thereby be restrained. But only so long as the breath remains subsided will the mind remain subsided. When the breath emerges again, the mind will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas, as he says. So pranayama is only a means to achieve a temporary dissolution of mind. So people are inclined in that way. They can use pranayama to calm the mind down, to reduce the activity of the mind. But then they need to, before the mind dissolves in laya, they need to turn their attention back within, send the mind on the investigating path, the path of self-investigation. In other words, they need to turn their attention back towards themselves. Then only is it possible to bring about the permanent dissolution of the mind. So he's just merely showing there how these different paths can lead to self-investigation. But he makes it very clear that it's only by self-investigation that the mind will die. So for those who are inclined to, there's no wrong in using pranayama, but it's not necessary because, as Bhagavan himself pointed out, we don't need any aid to calm the mind down, because the most effective way to calm the mind down is self-attentiveness. So we don't have to first calm the mind down in order to be self-attentive. If we turn our attention back to ourselves, that will automatically calm the mind down. It will also calm the breath down. That's just a side effect.
Sanjay, you wanted to ask a question?
So, sir, in one of your recent videos, you say when we talk about mind, we should understand from the context what it refers to.
Yes.
Is it referring to just to the grosser functions of the mind, the Manomaya Kosha, or is it referring to Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha, that is the mind, intellect, and the will? It can refer to them collectively. It can also include all these plus ego. It can also mean just ego, in whose view all other things exist. And mind can also be used in this sense of attention. So this is the entire thing. My question now, sir, is regarding the two contexts in which we can use the mind. My question is, sir, as you say, the term mind can be used as a collective name for the mind, the intellect, and the will.
Yeah.
The mind can also be used to refer to all these three plus ego. So can you please explain with examples where exactly can we use the mind, where exactly can we use the term mind in these two different contexts, just in these two contexts?
Okay. In verse 18 of Upadeshundya, Bhagavan begins by saying, Enangale manam, thoughts alone of a mind. What he implies by that is the totality of all thoughts is the mind. The totality of all thoughts includes ego. But in the next sentence, he says, of all, meaning of all thoughts, the thought called I alone is the root. What he refers to as the thought called I is ego. It is the root because, as I mentioned earlier, ego is a thought, but it's a thought unlike any other thought, because all other thoughts are jada. They're devoid of awareness. They're just objects. Whereas ego is the knowing subject. So all other thoughts seem to exist because they appear in the view of ego. So without ego, no other thought could exist. So as Bhagavan says there, of all thoughts, the ego is the root thought. And he ends that verse by saying, what is called mind is I. What he implies by that is, since ego is the root of all other thoughts, since no other thought can exist without ego, ego is what the mind essentially is. So he often uses the word mind as a synonym for ego. When he talks about the mind knowing the world, for example, or the mind projecting thoughts, what he means there by mind is ego. But when, for example, when people say, "Oh, my mind is a monkey mind. It's jumping here and there. There's so many thoughts agitating my mind." That's talking about other things. That's talking about the other thoughts which make the mind appear agitated. But all that exists only in the view of ego. So ego is the root and essence of the mind. And when the other sense in which we use the term mind, both in, I think probably in most languages, certainly in English and certainly in Tamil, and even Sanskrit, because in Gita, Krishna says, Atma samstam manakritva, which basically means fix the mind in self. So fixing the mind on something means fixing the attention on something. Because mind means ego, and ego is that which knows all things. So fixing the mind on something means fixing our awareness on it, fixing our attention on it.
So, sir, you have not addressed my doubt, sir. That is clear. You say here the mind can be used as a collective name for the mind, intellect, and will. The mind can also be used to refer to all these three plus ego. There are different senses. So
Yeah,
what you have said is three.
All mind, intellect, and will, the Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha, these are all, the Manomaya Kosha means all the grosser functions of the mind, the thoughts, feelings, emotions, perceptions, memories, and so on. Intellect is the reasoning, understanding, discerning aspect of the mind. That's a subtler function of the mind. Subtler than intellect is the will. That consists of all the vasanas that make up the Anandamaya Kosha. But the mind is also sometimes described as the antakarana. And the antakarana is said to have four functions. The mind, which is the Manomaya Kosha, the grosser functions, the intellect, which is the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the Chittam, which is the will, or Anandamaya Kosha, and ego, which is the essence of mind, the ahankara. So Bhagavan has said about this antakarana that these are not actually four different things. They're four different functions of the same thing. So the function of the Manomaya Kosha, or manas, is the perception, memory, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. The function of the intellect is reasoning, understanding, judging, discerning, and so on. The function of Anandamaya Kosha, or will, is all the vasanas, all the likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. And the function of ego, the ego is not any of the five sheaves. The other three are the subtlest three of the five sheaves. Ego is not any of the five sheaves. Ego is that which identifies all the five sheaves as I. So as ego, we feel, I am sitting. What is sitting is just the gross body is sitting. But we feel I am sitting, I am breathing, I'm digesting my food, I'm pumping the blood around the body. Those are all the functions of the prana. I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm touching, I'm tasting, I'm feeling, I'm I'm sad, I'm happy, all these different emotions, these are all the Manamaya kosha, but we identify ourselves with these. I'm reasoning, I'm judging, I'm understanding, I understand this, I don't understand that. All these we're identifying with the functions of the Vijnanamaya kosha, the intellect. I like this, I don't like that. We're identifying with the functions of the Anandamaya kosha, the will, the chittam. So ego is not any of the five sheaths, it's that which identifies all, it's distinct from all the five sheaths, but it identifies all the five sheaths as I. But essentially they're all boils down to ego ultimately. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Ulludunaptu, if ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not. Ego itself is everything. That is, this entire, all objects, all phenomena are nothing but an expansion of ego. As ego, we are seeing ourselves as this person, as this mind, as these thoughts, as all this entire world. When we dream, we are just seeing ourselves as that dream world. Likewise, in this waking state, everything that we are seeing ourselves as all these things. So ego is what ego sees as all these things is only itself. So ego itself is everything.
So that is clear now. So the Antakarna word I have heard that includes all four: ego, mind, intellect, will. But in one more context, you say that even this ego is excluded there. Only the three are used.
Well, if we're talking about other thoughts, then all those are other thoughts. So we have to. It's always important. We always need to make this the drisya viveka, distinguishing the seer from the seen. So Manomaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, and Anandamaya kosha. These are all objects. We know the perceptions, we know the memories, we know the thoughts and feelings and emotions and so on. We know the functioning of the intellect. We know the vasanas, we know the likes, dislikes. These are all objects known by us. They appear in our view and they disappear in our view. So the most important distinction is the distinction between ego and everything else. Ego is the subject, everything else is objects. Ego is the drik, everything else is drisya. So in different contexts, we need to that is the most basic distinction of all, most fundamental distinction.
When we are talking about drishya, we are talking about mind, intellect, will together.
Everything, the whole world is drisya. Everything, yeah. Whatever appears and disappears.
All objects.
Yeah.
All phenomena, all objects, whatever you call.
Yeah. Vishaya is, yeah.
All vishayas. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Michael, just wanted to ask you a quick question. The I thought, what distinguishes it in a way from all other thoughts is that it's a sense not only of subjectivity, of awareness, but it's a sense of being. It's a sort of like, it's a limited version of the Satchitananda.
Exactly. It is Satchit alone that appears as ego. When Satchit is seemingly conflated with adjuncts, as I am this body, then it is called ego. So the adjunct conflated Satchit is ego. But Satchit is never actually, Satchit always remains as Satchit, it's never affected. It's only in the view of ego that it's ego that experiences itself as a body, not Satchit never experiences itself. So that's why Bhagavan says in verse 24 of Ulludunaptu, he distinguishes ego from the body on the one hand and from Satchit on the other hand. He says, Jada Urul-nanenadu, the Jada body, the non-aware body does not say I. implying it's not aware of itself as I. And when he says body there, he's referring to all the five sheaves. Then in the next sentence, he says, Satchit udiyadu. Satchit does not rise. And then in the third sentence, he says, in between, one thing, I, rises as the extent of a body. Since it's I, since it's aware of itself as I, it's not the body. Since it rises, it's not Satchit. So it's neither this nor that, but it borrows the properties of both. It borrows I from, borrows the awareness I from Satchit. In other words, it borrows its being and its awareness from Satchit. It borrows its form from the body. That's why he says it rises as the extent of a body. It limits itself as if it's just this small body. And then he goes on to say, this is Chitjadagranti, Bandham, bondage, Jivan, Jiva, the soul, Nupame, the subtle body, Ahande, ego, this samsara, the whole of samsara is nothing but this ego, and mind. So it is neither Satchit, nor is it the body, but something in between. But it derives its being and its awareness from Satchit. It derives its limited form from the body. If we remove the limitations, what remains is Satchit. That's why Bhagavan often made clear the reality that ego as ego is unreal, but it's real as Satchit. In day by day, there are a couple of places where someone asked Bhagavan a question, something to the effect of, what is the difference between, I don't know whether he said, I think in one place ego and the other place mind, but what is the difference between mind and self? And Bhagavan said there's no difference. When the same awareness looks outward, it's called mind. When it turns within, it's called self. In other words, self is the underlying reality of what appears as mind or ego.
So the minute there is a limitation in that sense of self, in that being awareness, that
Yes.
Satchit, there is then, of course, because it's not resting in itself, in its fullness, in itself, there is that grasping immediately.
Immediately, yes.
And then, of course, it's grasping on.
But grasping is how it limits itself by grasping. And the rising of ego, its grasping form, it's limiting itself. These are all one and the same thing. They're just different ways of describing the same inexplicable non-event. I mean, it seems to have happened, but if we investigate this ego, we'll find it has never actually risen. There has never ever been anything other than Satchit, which has always remained as it is. So the ultimate truth is ajata. But we can experience that only by investigating what this ego actually is. When we investigate it and find that it's nothing but Satchit and there's never been anything but Satchit, then we find that we are eternally liberated, as Bhagavan says.
So the ego, the I thought, that Satchit in limited form is the grasping itself. So in that sense, it's the act of eyeing, so to speak.
Yes, it's both the act and the doer of the act.
Yes, both, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's when it recognizes itself as a doer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. The next question.
Grasping is its very nature. Grasping things other than itself is its very nature. So if it, instead of grasping other things, if it tries to grasp itself, it will subside and dissolve back into its source. That's what Bhagavan implies in verse 25 of Ulurunapadu.
That grasping, one could call, well, sort of one word, sort of an additional word for it could be will in some sense.
Well, yeah, will is what is the driving force behind grasping. Why we grasp this body as I? Because of our will to have this separate existence. The will is the Ichcha Shakti.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, that's probably, yeah. The next question, thank you, Michael, that
No.
really. The next question is, does that mean that the material world in all its subtlety is a projection of our imagination, that is the ego's imagination, created in the same way a dreamer, through his imagination, projects outward a whole dream world that appears real whilst it is being experienced? So as the self, is it right to say there's no externalized phenomena or world? It is all imagined like a dream. So there is the issue of nothingness. Everything is nothing. It's only the self is something.
I think the idea of nothingness is not a very useful idea because nothingness is not a thing. It doesn't exist. But so all this, all that we see as all this multiplicity, ultimately it is nothing but the one Satchit, the one being awareness that we actually are. So we see ourselves as all this multiplicity, but the we who see ourselves thus is not Satchit, but only this ego, which is neither Satchit nor the body, but borrows the properties of both. But in essence, is nothing other than Satchit. So long as we look outwards, we seem to be ego, because we look outwards when we identify a body as I. Because in order, in a dream, we always experience ourselves as a part of the dream that we're experiencing. Because we can't see multiplicity except from a point of view. So the point of view from which we experience all this is this body. So we see the whole world in relation to ourselves. This is here, that is there. This is now, that was then, or will be then. Everything is centered around this I. All experience, the center of all experience is the experiencer. But if the experiencer, instead of looking outwards at phenomena, turns its attention back within to look at itself, it will thereby subside and dissolve back into itself and remain as pure Satchit, pure being awareness. So in order to turn within, we need to have all-consuming love. We need to have the willingness to give up everything, to surrender everything. But all that we surrender is a tiny, tiny price compared to the great reward that lies at the end. Bhagavan sometimes compared our reluctance to surrender ourselves to a person who has a quarter paisa, tiny, tiny copper coin, worth almost nothing. But they're offered the entire universe if they will surrender that small copper coin. But they're holding on to the copper coin. No, I want this copper coin also. You can't, if you are willing to let go of that trivial thing, this trivial ego, we become the infinite whole. We don't become the infinite whole, we remain at the infinite whole that we always actually are. And that infinite whole, though it's devoid of both subject and object, is devoid of all phenomena, it is not a void, it is not nothingness, it is not sunya, it is purna, it is fullness. But what is it full of? It's full of itself, it's full of Satchit, Satchitananda. infinite being, infinite awareness, and infinite happiness, and infinite love. That is what we actually are. And we are, moment by moment, we are sacrificing that just for the sake of this small identity that we're clinging to with so much love and attachment.
Next question now. Bhagavan talks about the I dissolving in the heart, and it is my understanding that in non-duality, the ego doesn't exist as a thing. I heard Robert Adams refer to the ego as being a knot in the heart, and only when the knot is undone can the I finally be absorbed into the self. Could you please ask Michael, what is the nature or substance of the I that dissolves in the heart?
The essential substance of the I is the heart itself, Satchit. But as ego, is that Satchit conflated with the limitations of a body. But ego is not the body, nor is it Satchit. It's a spurious entity that rises between, as Bhagavan put it. But even that is, we can't talk about these things without talking metaphorically. When Bhagavan talks about ego rising in between, he means in between the body and Satchit. But the body has no existence independent of Satchit. So it's just a metaphorical way of describing it. What actually exists is only Satchit. When we rise as ego, we seem to separate ourselves from that infinite, from the infinite Satchit that we actually are, by identifying ourselves as a finite body. So when he says in between, it has various implications. One of the implications is the only connection between the body and therefore the world and Satchit is ego. How is that? That is, the body and world don't actually exist. They seem to exist in the view of ego. So they derive their semi-existence from the semi-existence of ourself as ego. And as ego, we derive our semi-existence from the real existence of ourself as Satchit. So Satchit is the ultimate source. I mean, it is the only thing that actually exists. So it's the ultimate source of all that seems to exist. But the go-between, the intermediary is ego. Because it's only in the view of ego that all other things seem to exist. And it's only in the view of ego that ego seems to exist. So we seem to be ego so long as we're looking outwards. If we who are now looking outwards look back within, we will find that we are eternally Satchit and have never been ego.
Michael, I get that. When Robert Adams referred to a knot in the heart, it kind of resonated with me because sometimes I don't know if it's fear, but when my ego is triggered in some situation, I really feel I experience something, a physical sensation in my heart. So, it seems to be a real thing. I'm not saying that's the ego in its entirety, or whether it's just a fear, but there seems to be some sensation there. So when Robert Adams talks about the knot in the heart, it resonated with me. So I just wondered if you could maybe speak to that, please.
Well, we need to understand what is meant by heart. That is, the word heart is used in many different senses. In the grossest sense, the heart is a physical organ. That we're not talking about. But we use the word heart in many other senses. We talk about, have a heart. That means be kind. So the heart is a term we use to refer to our emotions, which seem to be the thing that is closest to us. But what is the heart of the emotions? Ego is the heart of ego is the heart of everything that it experiences, because it's only in the view of ego that all things experience. We experience everything in relation to ego, which is identified with the body. So, as Bhagavan often said, the real heart, the ultimate heart, is not anything physical. The heart, that is, ego is the heart of all that it experiences. And the heart of ego is I am. Ego is the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. That is the knot that is often referred to as Chit Jadagranthi, the knot between consciousness and what is non-conscious. In other words, what is Jada, what is insentient. When it's said knot, it means these two seem to be entangled, so it's called a knot. This same knot is sometimes referred to as Hridaya Granthi, the knot of the heart, because it's that is at the center of this knot is the heart, the awareness I am. So when we use the word heart, we need to understand from a context the sense in which, that is, in simple terms, heart means center. So we can say the mind is the center of the whole world. The center of the mind is the reason we refer to emotions as or our feelings as a heart is because they feel very intimate to us. Deeper than the emotions is the will. That is why we feel the emotions, because of our likes, our dislikes, our desires, attachments, and everything. So in deeper sense than the emotions, we refer to the will as the heart. In a deeper sense than the will, who is it? Whose will is it? It's ego's will. So ego is the center of the will. And what is the center of ego? It is Satchit. So the ultimate heart, the heart in the sense in which Bhagavan usually uses the term, is what alone actually exists.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that referred to as a spiritual heart rather than, the organ.
Yes, yeah. But it's not just that there are two hearts. There's a physical heart and a spiritual heart, because, as I say, there's so many.
Sure.
We use the heart in so many ways. We use the heart referring to our emotions. We use the heart referring to our will. We use the heart referring to ego, and we use the heart referring to what we ultimately are. So we need to understand from a context the sense in which it's used.
You mentioned earlier about us being the sort of reference point for everything. So something happens over there, or something will happen, but we're the reference point for it. So
because we're the experiencer, everything happens.
Sure, of course. Yeah. So when I'm sitting and there's a physical sensation in my chest, and we're talking about the opening of the heart there, and there's a physical sensation in my chest, like a tightness or a knot. And that seems to be that seems to me to be the reference to it keeps me as the reference point to other, or to the past, or to the future.
Yes,
that seems to be what keeps me here.
But the important distinction we need to make is between subject and object. Anything
that seems to be
the body is an object. Any sensation, any feeling, any impression we feel, that is an object. So we first need to distinguish ourselves as the subject from all objects. The subject is ego. The experiencer is ego. Everything that is experienced are objects. So anything with relation to the body is an object known by ego.
Okay, so you're saying ego is subject. I would have thought the self is the subject.
No, because subject is subject. Subject means the knower of objects.
Okay.
In the view of Satchit, what we actually are, there are no objects. There's only Satchit.
Okay, I get you now.
It's only when that's why Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uludnaplu, if ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not. What he means by everything there is all phenomena.
So even subject is phenomena.
No, subject is is that which identifies itself as a tiny section of phenomena, that which identifies it. This body is a phenomena. The body, when I talk about the body, when Bhagavan talks about body, he's not just referring to the physical form of the body, he's referring to all five sheaves. That's the body, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. Because we experience these collectively as I. So this is what he means by body. Ego is the I that identifies itself as I in this body. And it's only after identifying itself as I in this body that it's aware of other things.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting, because I always thought subject. I understand where I was incorrect there, but that's good to know.
It's very, very important. That is the first distinction we need to make is between subject and object. And then we need to understand that even the subject is not the ultimate reality.
Yeah.
Only when the subject, namely ego, the experiencer, turns its attention back within, it thereby subsides and it dissolves back into Sat-Chit, which is the ultimate reality, which is non-dual. Which is non-dual. In a state of non-duality, there can be no subject or object.
Yeah.
Subject is subject only in relation to the objects.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Right. A lot of things that Robert Adams says, they're just taken from Bhagavan, but there's not much subtlety there in his understanding. He's read talks and he's able to reproduce things, but he doesn't go into he doesn't go much into subtleties.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Next question. Are there any physiological symptoms that occur when turning the mind persistently away from objects towards one's being? I have read that Ramakrishna and Krishnamurti and others experienced intense heat sensations prior to the dissolution.
All sorts of experiences may arise while we're on the path, but whatever arises is a phenomena, is an object, something known by us. When our attention is turned towards ourselves, if our attention is really turned towards ourselves, we won't be aware of any phenomena at all. But in the process of turning our attention towards ourselves, our attention is wavering. We're trying to turn it towards ourselves, but it keeps on coming outwards. In that wavering state, we may experience all sorts of heat, or people experience divine ecstasy, they experience the dark night of the soul, all sorts of, so many things. But whatever is experienced is something other than I, because it appears and disappears. So that's why Bhagavan gave us this very, very precious clue. Investigate to whom. So let any amount of heat appear, let any amount of bliss be experienced, let the dark night of the soul be experienced. To whom does it all appear? To me. Who am I? We turn our attention more and more and more within. The more we turn our attention within, the less we will be aware of any external phenomena. Even if these external phenomena, these different states of mind or appear, will be less and less affected by them, because we're detaching ourselves more and more. We're detaching ourselves from other things by attaching ourselves to that which is beyond attachment, in other words, our own being, which is Bhagavan, which is Aruṇācala, which is the Supreme, as he describes it in this verse 9 of Aruṇācala Padigam.
Namaskara, Michael. 2 questions, please. In the example of the rope and the snake, inquiry leads to non-existence of the snake and its ever-existent reality as rope. Does it imply that the purpose of any object, whether of like or dislike, is to facilitate inquiry and dive into the self?
Yes, but we need to, that is, all analogies have their limitations. Often the snake rope analogy is used regarding the universe, regarding the external phenomena. But what they ultimately, the reality of all these external phenomena is Brahman. But that doesn't mean that by researching on the external phenomena, we're eventually going to find Brahman. So the analogy falls down there. If we take ego to be the snake and the Brahman or our own reality to be the rope, then we can say if we investigate ego. Because we need to understand all the external phenomena exist only in the view of ego. So to find out the ultimate reality of all the external phenomena, we need to find the ultimate reality of ego. And to find the ultimate reality of ego, we need to turn within. So it's only by investigating ourselves, who now seem to be ego, that we will find out what we actually are. So our attention always needs to be directed back within. That's why this clue that Bhagavan gave us, to whom, is such a valuable clue, because that is turning our attention back to ourselves. And it's only by turning our attention back to ourselves and holding on to that self-attentiveness that we will subside and dissolve back into our source. So long as we're looking outwards, we're feeding and nourishing ego. This is a very important point that Bhagavan has clarified. That is, some of the things Bhagavan says, when viewed superficially, may seem to contradict the ancient teachings of Vedanta. They may seem to contradict certain things that are said in the Upanishads, for example. In the Upanishads, it said, all of this is Brahman. But Bhagavan says, all of this is ego. Is he contradicting? No, he's not. He's actually clarifying. All of this is Brahman in the sense that all of this is ego, and ego is nothing but Brahman. So if we want to know Brahman, know ourselves as we actually are, we need to investigate ego. Everything other than ourself derives its seeming existence from ourself as ego. So when we investigate ego, we then find what we actually are. That is, what we actually are is what is called Brahman or Satchidananda or whatever if we choose to call it. That is the sole reality. And is that from which ego derives its seeming being, and everything else derives its seeming being from ego. So ego is the essential intermediary. That's what Bhagavan has made so clear. So actually, Bhagavan has clarified a lot of things that are said in the Upanishads. In the Upanishads, in some places, the analogy of the spider spinning the thread out from itself is given. And it is said Brahman has projected this whole world and draws it back into itself. But in Nana, Bhagavan says, the mind is like the spider that has projected the world and draws it back into itself. Again, is he contradicting the Upanishads? No, he's not. He's clarifying what is meant. Because Brahman as Brahman doesn't project anything. It is just pure being. It's only Brahman in the form of mind that projects everything and draws it back into itself. So it's only by mind there means ego. That is, what has projected all this is what is seeing all this. Who has projected the dream? It's the dreamer. The dreamer is both the projector and the seer, because projection and seeing are actually simultaneous. They're one and the same thing, because we project in our awareness. So Bhagavan has clarified many subtle nuances that weren't so obvious in older texts, but Bhagavan has come to clarify. And most important of all, Bhagavan has clarified the practical implication of all of Vedanta. That the practical implication is that we should turn within to know who am I. We can't know who am I just by studying the books. To know who am I, we need to turn our attention back within to be aware of ourselves as we actually are.
The second question is, does the purpose precede the arising of the ego, enabling self-recognition, or do the objects serve no purpose at all?
So long as we see objects, we can give them a purpose. We can say all these objects are to remind us of the subject. There couldn't be any object without the subject. So whatever phenomena may appear, they should remind us to turn our attention back to ourselves, the one to whom they appear. But ultimately, they have no purpose because they have no existence whatsoever. Just like ego has no purpose because it's got no. If we investigate ego, we find there's no such thing. When there's no such thing as ego, that means there's no such thing as any phenomena, because the phenomena have no existence at all independent of ego. They seem to exist only in the view of ego. So there is no. So long as we're in bondage, our purpose is to get liberation. But so it's only relative to our experience of ego that we can attribute purpose to anything. But ultimately, the truth is, ajata, nothing has ever happened, nothing has ever come into being. What is alone is as it always is. So the purpose is meaningless from the perspective of ajata. But so long as we experience ourselves as ego, if we are wise, we will give ourselves a purpose. Our purpose is to know who am I. And regarding the first part of the question, the question started, did purpose precede ego? Sure. Nothing preceded ego. As Bhagavan says in verse 26, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. So ego is the first rising. The only thing that precedes ego is what always is, and what alone is, namely Satchit, Brahman, Satchitananda, whatever we want to call it. Ourself as we actually are.
The next question is, did Bhagwan recommend closed eye meditation practice to be self-attentive, in addition to clinging to the self while acting in the world? Thank you.
One important thing to understand is Bhagavan didn't give do's and don'ts. He didn't prescribe that we should do things in one way or another way. Bhagavan did, he indicated to us what it is necessary for us to do, which is to investigate ourselves. In other words, to be self-attentive. How we should apply that in practice, Bhagavan didn't say it should be done this way or that way, but he did give certain pointers. He very clearly says, for example, in the 11th paragraph of Nana, he says, Oravantan sarupam deyam variyal, nirantara sarupa smaranaye kai patrivanayan adwandre podam. That means until one attains Swarupa. Swarupa means what we actually are. Until one attains Swarupa, if one clings to Nirantara Swarupa Smarana, that means uninterrupted remembrance of ourself as we actually are, that alone is sufficient. So when he defined what Atma-vichara is, he said it is, in the 16th paragraph of Nana, he said sada kalamum. That means always. Sada kalamum manate atma-vil vaitirupadu. That is always keeping the mind in oneself, on oneself. So holding on to self-attentiveness is our aim. We should hold on to self-attentiveness as much as possible. We may not succeed in doing this always. In fact, I'm sure most of us are very far from succeeding in holding on to Swarupa Smarana or self-attentiveness. It's different ways of describing the same thing. Most of us are not able to hold on to it uninterruptedly or always. But we must, that is what we are working towards. We're trying to be self-attentive as much as possible. So whether our eyes are open or closed, we're always aware I am. So closing the eyes or not is really immaterial. It doesn't matter whether eyes are closed. What matters is where our attention is. Our eyes can be closed, but our mind can be wandering. Our eyes can be open, but our attention can remain on ourselves. So it's got nothing to do with eyes. Once when Bhagavan, well, maybe more than once, but at least once it's recorded, but when someone asked Bhagavan, what is the best asana for meditation, he said Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana means deep contemplation. In the context of his teaching, Nididhyasana means self-attentiveness. So nothing other than self-attentiveness is required. If we find it helpful to close our eyes, by all means close the eyes. If we find it helpful to open the eyes, by all means open them. But whether our eyes are open or closed, whether we're sitting or lying or standing or walking or running or doing this work or that work, it doesn't matter. We are all, the one background to all our experience is I am. We're always aware of our own being. We can't be doing anything without being. So being is the base. That is what we need to hold on to. Trying to hold on to our being, whatever the mind, speech, or body may be doing. So it is useful sometimes when we're not engaged in any other activity to try to go deeper within. But we will succeed in going deeper within only to the extent to which we hold on to self-attentiveness at other times. So the main practice is trying to hold on to self-attentiveness, at least to some extent, throughout the day. Then at times when we are free from other activities, if we really holding on to self-attentiveness as much as possible during other activities, we'll naturally go deeper within when we're not engaged in other activities. But if we try to go deeper within, just the 5 minutes morning and evening when we sit for meditation, we're not going to go very deep within. It's the most important thing is trying to hold on to self-attentiveness as much as possible throughout the day, whatever we may be doing. That is we can consider the central practice. That will automatically lead to going deeper within at times when we're free from other activities. That's why Bhagavan always emphasized, always, uninterruptedly. That is what we should be trying for.
That's a great help. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, you're welcome. All these answers, actually, they're there implied in Bhagavan's own words. We just have to think about what he said and understand the implications. The implications will become clearer and clearer as we practice this more and more. Because as we practice it, we'll gain the clarity. And as we gain more clarity, the implication of Bhagavan's words, not just the meaning, but the implication of them will become clearer and clearer.
The next question. In terms of Bhagwan's body-mind, would you say that while the body-mind saw the world, it had no sense of doership or enjoyership? It seems that the self never sees the world, whether the human expression is an enlightened sage or an ignorant person.
Yes, when we say the self never sees the world, that is true in a certain sense, but also not true in a certain sense. That is, rather than talking about the self, let's talk about Bhagavan, because Bhagavan is what we actually are. Bhagavan always sees what we see. The difference is not in what he is seeing, but in what he sees it as. That is, he sees what we see as the world is what he sees as himself. What we see as many is what he sees as one. That is why in verse 18 of Ulutunapadu, he says something that may seem surprising if we know his teachings. His teaching is that the world is unreal. But in verse 18, he says, the world is real both for those who know themselves and those who do not know themselves. That would seem to be contradicting his main teaching. But why does he say so? He makes it clear that the world is real both for those who don't have awareness. That here awareness means self-knowledge. Those who don't have self-knowledge and those who do have it. But reality, for those who don't know, the reality is just to the extent of the world. In other words, it's limited to the world. Whereas for those who do know, the reality shines as the adhara, at the base. It shines without form as the base for the world. So we see the one reality as this multitude of names and forms. What we see as this multitude of names and forms is what Bhagavan sees as the one reality. In other words, he is seeing the one reality as it is, as himself, whereas we are seeing the one reality as all this multitude of names and forms. So, is Bhagavan seeing the world or is he not seeing the world? He's not seeing it as we are seeing it, but what we are seeing, he is seeing as it is. So he's not seeing it as world, he's seeing it as the nameless and formless underlying reality, the adhara, the ground for the appearance of all these things. So to put it in another word, he sees the screen, we see the pictures, but we're both looking at exactly the same thing. We're both ultimately seeing the same thing, but we see it as some story evolving on a screen. He sees it just as an ever-unchanging screen. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
Next question. Is attention just focused awareness? Are they the same thing or are they the same thing?
Yes, that is the same thing.
The next one. How and why did the original sin occur, especially as karma and vasanas were not in existence? Thank you.
If you ask that question to Bhagavan, he'll first say, find out whether it's occurred. That is, the original sin is just ego. If we investigate ego, we find there's no such thing. Then there can be no answer to the question of how or why. It's like asking, how was the son of a barren woman born? Why was he born? It's a meaningless question because there's no such thing as the son of a barren woman. Likewise, asking how and why is assuming that ego exists. But ego doesn't actually exist, it merely seems to exist. And if we as ego turn our attention back to see what we actually are, we will find we have never been ego, we have always been the infinite, unchanging Satchit. In answer to go back to the previous question about attention, that is, attention is a function of ego, because when we rise as ego, we project and see all this multiplicity, but we can't be simultaneously aware of everything equally. So we have this ability to focus our awareness on a selection of, on one thing or a selection of things within this vast field of phenomena that we've projected. So there's no such thing as attention in sleep, because ego doesn't exist in sleep. Because ego doesn't exist, nothing else exists. So it's only when we rise as ego, we project all this multiplicity, then we have this power of attention, this ability to focus our attention on one thing or other. But generally we focus our attention, our awareness, on phenomena. Our aim, if we're following Bhagavan's path, our aim is to focus our awareness on awareness itself. In other words, to focus our attention on ourself alone. So what is doing the self-investigation? It is ego. Only ego our real nature doesn't need to investigate itself, because it always knows itself as it is. It's only as ego, because we mistake ourselves to be something other than what we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves in order to experience ourselves as we actually are. As soon as we experience ourselves as we actually are, we cease to be ego and remain as we actually are. Because what we actually are cannot be an object of experience. We can know it only by being it.
Please, could you go into more detail about what is surrendered and how we are not surrendering, and give examples of how it would look to surrender in everyday life? Many thanks, Michael.
Okay. The nature of ego is clinging, grasping, holding on to things other than ourselves. So surrender is letting go of things. So there are different degrees of surrender. The driving force behind all our clinging is desire, is our will, our likes and dislikes and so on. So surrender begins with us trying to surrender our will to God. Not my will, but your will. In other words, we're trying to minimize our will by accepting whatever happens as being the sweet will of the Lord, and accepting it wholeheartedly as his Aral Prasadam, as the prasadam of his grace. So we are trying to give up our will. That means our desires and attachments and so on. We can do so to some extent by following the path of devotion to God as something other than ourselves. But we can never be completely free of desire and attachment, but so long as we rise as ego, because desire and attachment are the very nature of ego. So we can reduce the strength of our desires and attachments, but we cannot free ourselves from them entirely without freeing ourselves from ego, the one whose desires and attachments they are. So ultimately, surrender is surrender of ourself as ego. In order to surrender ego, we need to first understand the nature of ego. Nature of ego, as explained by Bhagavan, is to rise, stand, and flourish by grasping things other than ourselves, by grasping form. So long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves, we are feeding and nourishing ego. If we want to surrender ego, we have to attend to ourselves alone, because the nature of ego, which is to rise, stand, and flourish so long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves, if instead we attend to ourselves, we as ego will thereby subside and dissolve back into our source, our own being. So surrender the final step on the path of surrender is self-investigation. The self-surrender can become complete only by means of self-investigation. When we surrender ego, we thereby surrender everything, because everything exists only in the view of ego. So until we are willing to surrender everything, we won't be willing to surrender ego. And if we're not willing to surrender ego, we won't be willing to attend to ourselves. So when we try to attend to ourselves, we'll be engaged in a battle within our own will, between our desire and attachment for other things and our love to free ourselves from all this burden, to hand over everything to Bhagavan, to surrender ourselves completely to him. Bhagavan often said the whole spiritual path is nothing but a battle within our own will. A battle between our liking to go outwards and our love to turn back within. The more we practice trying to turn back within, the more we practice trying to surrender our will to his will, the more the love to subside back within will grow, and the desire to rise and go outwards will diminish in strength. In other words, the Vishaya vasanas will get weaker and weaker, and the Sat vasana, the inclination just to be as we are, will grow stronger. This is why practice is absolutely essential. It's only by practice that we can gain that strength of love to subside and be as we actually are.
There was a follow-up to the previous question, which is, so attention would be an act of will.
Yes, yeah. Our will is what drives our attention. If we are say watching a very interesting film, it actually takes effort to attend to anything. That's why at the end of the day, after 16 hours of attending to other things, we're too tired to continue and we fall asleep. But it doesn't seem like an effort. If we're watching a very interesting film, our whole attention will be wrapped up in that film. We don't feel it's any effort. But if we're asked to attend to ourselves, it seems to be very difficult because we lack the interest to attend to ourselves. So the will is the driving force behind our attention. Our attention it follows our desires. So if we want to weaken the outward going desires and strengthen the inward going desire, we have to turn our attention within more and more and more. It's all a matter of the will is the driving force behind everything. That's why the will is called the karana sarira, the causal body, because it consists of all the vasanas, the seeds that give rise to everything. And Bhagavan said the whole world, all Vishayas, are nothing but a projection of our Vishaya vasanas.
Yeah, there are times when the mind is quiet and you just sort of look back at life and the entire thing is a fabrication. The past,
Yeah.
the present,
Yes.
fabricated part.
It seems very unreal.
Yeah.
That is how the years have passed. And this body has changed, everything has changed. But the only thing that remains the same is we are the same.
Yes. Yes.
Everything else is just a dream.
This is the last question. So Namaskaram, Michael. In the first Mangalam verse of Uludu Narpatu, is the second clause connected to the first or the third? If it's taken as reasoning for the first clause, it doesn't seem to make sense. And also, in the third clause, can the word ullam be taken as I am instead of the heart, since ullam can be taken as the first person plural of ul? Thank you.
Yeah, well, about ullam, yes. That is the usual second, we are the second person form of the first person plural form of the verb to be is ullom. That's a usual form. But in literary Tamil, it can also be ullam. So ullam can mean we are. When Bhagavan uses we, he's using it as an inclusive form of the first person. So he's not intending it to be understood as plural, but as an inclusive form of the first person. So he's not, if he says I, he's excluding us. If he says you, he's excluding himself. So he says we to make it inclusive. So ullam means the heart. It also means we are. So it has a double meaning. Both meanings are perfectly appropriate there, because he says ullamenam ullaporul. Ullaporul means the being substance, the existing substance, the sat vastu. That sat vastu is I am. Regarding the first sentence, that is one thing that's important to understand about this verse. Bhagavan first composed only the last two lines. So the original verse was Ulla Porul, Ulla Levan, Ulla Te, Ulla Padi, Ulla De, Ullal Una. That means Ulla Porul, Ulla Levan. Who can or how to meditate on the heart? Ulla Te, in the heart, Ulla Padi, as it is, Ulla De, being, is meditating. So being in the heart as it is meditating. Here meditating means meditating on the Ulla Porul, the Satvastu, on Brahman. So how to meditate on Brahman? The only way to meditate on Brahman is to be in the heart as it is. What does it mean being in the heart? It's what is in the heart means the center. The ultimate heart is the ultimate center. So what is in the ultimate center is only the heart. So what is in the heart is the heart itself. So being in the heart as it is means being as we actually are. That is meditating on the Ulla Porul. So he first composed only those last two lines. Later, when he had completed 40 verses, and this at that time there was just one Mangalam verse, Kaviyaganta happened to be present there at the time, and someone said Bhagavan has composed this work in Tamil. So Kaviyaganta asked to see it. His mother tongue was Telugu, but he had lived a long time in Tamil Nadu, so he could speak Tamil. He wasn't very conversant with literary Tamil, so but he could read it, but he wasn't very. It wasn't very easy for him to understand. He wasn't very familiar with the literary Tamil. So when he saw a 2-line verse as the Mangalam, and all the other verses were 4-lined, he said, "Oh, why is this verse in a different meter? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to have a verse in the same meter?" Then Bhagavan explained to him it's the same meter, but this 2-line verse is called a Kural Vemba. And he then reminded him about Tiruvallava's work, Tirukural, a very famous work in Tamil. That's all written in Kural Vemba. All the other verses are 4-line Vembas. It's exactly the same meter. There's no difference in the meter. It's just one is a 2-line version and the other is a 4-line version. Then Kavigan said, well, but wouldn't it be better if it was also 4 lines? So Bhagavan then, Murugana was also present. So Bhagavan looked at Murugana and said, okay, should we make it a 4-line verse? And Murugana said, yes, why not? I mean, Murugana is always keen to encourage Bhagavan to write more. So Bhagavan then wrote the first 2 lines. And after that, Kavyaganta looked at him and said, how can this be a Mangalam? There's no mention of God in this. A Mangalam has to be a prayer to God. So he looked through the whole work, looking for a name of God. And finally he found one verse, which is somewhere after verse 30, which contained the word Mahesan. Mahesan means the great Lord. It's often a name of Lord Shiva. So he said, oh, this would be an appropriate verse to have as, why don't you make this verse the Mangalam verse instead of that one? And again, Bhagavan and Murugan discussed the matter, and they decided that the first verse is talking about Atma-vichara. The second verse, that is this other verse referring to Mahesan, is talking about surrender, which of course, they're one and the same thing, but they're just two different ways of viewing the same thing. So since Bhagavan often talks about self-investigation and self-surrender, it would be appropriate to have one on self-investigation, one on self-surrender. So they decided to make that verse the second Mangalam, and then Bhagavan composed one other verse. I've forgotten which one it was. I think it was maybe 31 or something. I noted it down somewhere. I think I've written it somewhere, but I can't remember now which one it was. It was one. Bhagavan wrote that verse. So that's how it ended up 42 verses. But anyway, coming back to this first Mangalam verse, the first two lines were written to clarify the last line. So the first sentence has various different implications. I mean, we can interpret it several ways. Ulladu, alladu, ulla unavu, ullado. It can mean without ulladu, is there ulla unavu? Ulladu means what is. Ulla unavu means the awareness that is, or being awareness. It implies indirectly Satchit. It's not an exact translation of Satchit, but that's what it implies. It means being awareness, in other words, the awareness that is. So could there be, Ulla can also mean real, actual, because it's what actually exists. So could there be actual awareness without Ulladu, without what is? So that's one meaning. So it's saying, but because there is awareness, there must be what is. That's one way of taking it. So usually when in theology, when they or philosophy of religion, when anyone wants to prove the existence of God, they usually start by saying, see this vast world, there must have been something that created it. So they base the belief on God on the existence of the world. But Bhagavan doesn't go out that far. He says the very fact that we're aware means there is something that is. So he's inferring the ultimate reality from the mere fact of our awareness. And not just any awareness, the awareness of our own being. That's what he implies by Ulla Unavu. So this Ulla Unavu, there couldn't be this awareness of being if there wasn't something that actually is. That's one meaning. Another meaning is this awareness of being cannot be anything other than that what is. As he argued in verse 23 of Upadesh Undya, where he says, Ulladu unara unavu verinnayin ulladu unavahum. That means because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what is, to know what is awareness. So that's an argument for the oneness of Sat and Chit. Sat and Chit are not two different things. They're two ways of describing the same thing. That is, what actually exists is only awareness. So that's another implication here. Another meaning is this ulla, it can be a form of two verbs. That is, there's a verb, ulal, the verb ul, which means to be. So ulla is both an infinitive form of that. Oh, no, sorry. It's an adjectival participle of a verb to be. And this verb, there are several verbs in Tamil that mean to be, but the speciality of ul, it's a tenseless verb. So it's not talking about past or future. It's talking about the present being, the ever-present being. So it has a very deep meaning in Tamil. So ulla unavu can mean the being awareness. There's also another verb, ullu. Ullu means to think or to meditate. So ulla is the infinitive form of ullu. So ulla unavu can also mean an awareness to meditate. So another meaning of this sentence is, without what is, would there be an awareness to meditate? That is directly related to the question that comes at the end. So Bhagavan has packed three different meanings, at least three different meanings, into this first sentence. Then he, after saying that, he then goes on to say, the next sentence is an extension of the question that he started the verse with. Who, Evan can mean who, it can also mean how. So who can or how to meditate on the Ullaporul. He extended that sentence by adding Ullaporul, Ullalara, Ullate, Ulladal, Ullamenum, Ullaporul, Ullalevan. That means the first clause is Ullaporul, Ullalara, Ullate, Ulladal. Since the Ullaporul, the being substance, that which actually exists, the ultimate substance, the thing that really is, the Satvastu, since that Satvastu exists in the heart without thought. Why is it without thought? Because what he's talking about the heart here, he's talking about the ultimate heart, the ultimate center. So what is in the ultimate center is only the ultimate center itself. So the Ullaporul is itself the Ullam, the heart. So since that Ullaporul exists in the heart, since there's no room in the heart for anything other than the heart itself, because it's the ultimate center. Thoughts are very superficial. They appear in the mind. So in the heart, there's no such thing as thoughts. So thoughts are just a superficial appearance. So in the heart itself, what exists is only the heart, only the Ullaporul. So the Ullaporul exists in the heart without thought. Since that is so, who can think of it? That is what it means. And he also added this other clause, Ullamenum. Ullamenum means which is called Ullam. So the Ullaporul is called Ullam. As I said earlier, Ullam we can take in two ways. We can take to mean the straightforward meaning is heart. So this Ullaporul, the being substance, is the heart. It's the ultimate center of all things. It's that from which everything appears and into which everything disappears. It's ever the center. It's in the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body, which is ego. It is the I am. It's the very heart of the heart. So that's one meaning. It also means the Ullam means we are, but implying I am. So the being substance is what is called I am. So I am is the heart. The I am means Satchit. So Satchit is what we experience as our own being, what we are aware of as our own being. We express our being and our awareness of our being, which are one and the same thing, as I am, I exist. So it has a very deep meaning. So because it is, since this Ullaporul exists in the heart without thought, and since it is what is called heart, and since it's the heart itself, and it's I am, who can think of it? How to think of it? The only way to think of it, the only way to meditate upon it, is to be it in the heart, is to be as it is. Is that an adequate answer to that question? It's a very deep and subtle verse. There's so many, so much intricacies are there. And it's very, very beautiful. Almost every I think, yes, except for the final, that is, it's a meter, there are 4 feet in each line, except the last line where there are 3 feet. The last foot is just a half foot. Except that last foot, every foot begins with the syllables ulla. So he's using the syllable in such a beautiful way. Ulla dalla ulla una, ulla do, ulla porul, ulla lara, ulla te, ulla dal, ulla menum, ulla porul, ulla levan, ulla te, ulla padi, ulla de, ulla una. So it's such a beautiful, beautiful verse, but so, so deep in meaning. And incidentally, for those who know Sanskrit, Bhagavan also translated this verse into Sanskrit in the same Vemba meter. The Sanskrit version is Sadvina Sagnyanam Asti Kimu Satyam Vritti Rahitam Hridi Vibhati Tatridayam Jayati Katam Hridi Tadatma Bhava Bhavastitihi Dhyanam Satvastunasiyat. That means that is without sat, without existence, without being, could satnyanam exist? The satyam shines in the heart, free of thought. Therefore, how to meditate on it, the heart? Standing, the literal meaning of sthiti, standing, staying, remaining, abiding in the heart as it is. Tadatma bhava means as it is. Hridi means in the heart. Is contemplation on satvastu. Syat, may you be. So it's almost exact translation in Sanskrit. But for some reason, this Sanskrit version is very little known. Very few people know about it. It was in the, a notebook we used to call Murugan's Black Notebook, because it's the notebook in which many verses were written, and that is the original manuscript of Uludunapadu before the verses were arranged in order. And it also has some earlier versions of the verses of Uludunapadu before Bhagavan formed them into a final form.
Well, is that called the Saddarshanam, the Sanskrit version?
No. This is
Okay,
Bhagavan's own translation. Satdarshanam is Kavyagantha's translation, which is, which unfortunately is a very, very inaccurate translation. Some of the verses are very, very seriously mistranslated. Key words are missing, such as his translation of verse 13. He omits the words unreal, which Bhagavan uses twice, and he omits some other, I can't remember now, but he completely gives a completely different meaning because he's omitted the key words.
So where can we find this this version, the Bhagavan's version of the Sanskrit? Which book did you say? It's not available.
It is available on my website. If you go to my website to translations, if you in the translations page, there's Upadesha Kali Vemba, the extended version of Uludunapadu. If you go there, it's in the introduction I write about it.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much for this very, very long and wonderful session. Yeah, and
It has gone a long time today.
yes, it was quite long today.
Well,
and
some people have had the patience to remain with us, so.
Yes, and I think you've had the patience to answer these questions, and it's quite a lot of.
When I start talking about Bhagavan's teachings, I forget everything else. I just get carried away. I sometimes feel a little tired afterwards, but so long as I'm talking, well, Bhagavan gives me the strength to go on.
Thank you very, very much, Michael, and
thank you.
and We can close today with Bhagwan's mantra
Yes.
together. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Ramanaya.